"I'll give you my salary if you translate this," laughed the millionaire. But the black maid silenced him. The laughter rolled out of his chest like a drumbeat in a marble hall, deep and mocking, carrying the arrogance of a man who had never been proven wrong in his own kingdom. His office was a glass fortress at the top of the city, a place where sunlight hit every polished surface and bounced back as if even the rays had to obey him. Around him, assistants froze mid-typing, glances exchanged in the thin air of tension, pretending to stay focused on their screens. She was standing near the far end of the room, a cleaning cloth still in her hand, its edges damp from wiping the edge of his mahogany desk. The rag smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant, sharp, honest, and unpretentious. She was not supposed to be part of the conversation that had been unfolding between the boss and a foreign investor moments earlier. Yet, she was there, present in the periphery, unnoticed until the wrong kind of silence had settled after his challenge. The paper he had placed on the desk was no ordinary document. The symbols were intricate, ancient, their strokes both delicate and unyielding. The millionaire leaned back, watching her from under his perfectly tailored suit, a watch gleaming on his wrist worth more than her yearly wages. He wasn't expecting an answer. Men like him rarely did. They issued challenges the way kings might toss a coin into a crowd. A performance meant to display power, not to be taken seriously. The room seemed to shrink as the seconds dragged on. Someone coughed. The investor, a tall man with sharp cheekbones and an unreadable expression, glanced between them, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. The millionaire smirked, swirling the glass of whiskey in his hand, waiting for the awkwardness to push her out of the moment. But she didn't step back. Her grip on the cleaning cloth tightened, the faint sound of fabric straining under her fingers. Her gaze didn't break. And then, softly, so softly that the first syllables almost dissolved into the air, she began to speak. The language rolled off her tongue with a precision that cut through the room like a blade through silk. Her voice was steady, measured, each word carrying the weight of someone who had held it inside for years. The investor's eyes widened. He leaned forward, recognizing every nuance, every tonal inflection that only a native speaker could execute. The millionaire's smirk faltered. It wasn't just that she had translated it. It was that she had done it flawlessly, effortlessly, without hesitation. And in that instant, the balance of the room shifted. His wealth, his status, his practiced dominance. All of it seemed to dim against the sheer, undeniable reality of her skill. When she finished, the silence was heavier than before. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply laid the cleaning cloth back onto the desk, a quiet gesture that somehow spoke louder than applause. "I believe," the investor said slowly in accented English, "that we have underestimated your staff." His tone carried a sharp edge that was not lost on anyone. The millionaire cleared his throat, leaning forward in his chair, searching for a response. But the words didn't come easily now. His earlier laughter echoed faintly in the memory of the room, hollow and misplaced. She turned to leave, walking toward the door with the same measured pace she had used to enter. But just before she stepped out, she paused, her back still to him, and spoke one final sentence in that same foreign tongue. It wasn't a translation this time. It was something else, something layered with meaning he could not fully grasp, though it was clear from the investor's raised eyebrows that it was powerful. And then she was gone, leaving behind a man who suddenly realized that, for the first time in years, someone had stripped him of his certainty without ever raising their voice. The door clicked shut behind her, but the weight of her presence lingered in the air, pressing against the millionaire's chest like an invisible hand. He stared at the papers still lying on the desk, the black ink of the foreign script now feeling less like an exotic decoration and more like an indictment. The investor leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, studying him with an expression halfway between amusement and disdain. "You didn't tell me you had such resources," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone of accusation. "She's just a maid," the millionaire muttered, as if saying it out loud might reassert the order of things. But the words felt brittle in his mouth. He had meant them to be dismissive, yet they landed somewhere closer to self-defense. And that, he realized, was a problem. The investor's eyebrow arched slightly. Just a maid, he repeated, his accent curling around the words like smoke. Strange. Where I come from, people with such mastery of my language are far from just anything. That stung. The millionaire was not a man who enjoyed being corrected, especially in his own office. He turned to the panoramic window behind him, letting his gaze drift over the city skyline, hoping the view would restore his composure. Glass towers stood proud against the horizon, monuments to ambition and control. His world, his rules. And yet, in the space of a few minutes, that fragile architecture had cracked. He replayed the moment in his mind, searching for some sign that she had been bluffing, that the translation had been rehearsed, imperfect, unworthy of the awe it had inspired. But he knew it wasn't bluff. He had seen the investor's face. He had heard the subtle music in her intonation, something that could not be faked. "Tell me," the investor said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts, "how does a maid in your employ speak my native language with such precision?" The millionaire hesitated. "I have no idea," he admitted, but that was only partially true. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered overhearing fragments of her conversations in the staff lounge, little sounds he had ignored at the time. He had assumed it was just noise, or perhaps a dialect he didn't care to place. He had not been listening, not really. And now it seemed that negligence had cost him more than he could measure. The investor stood, straightening his suit jacket. "I think our meeting is over," he said. "I will reconsider your proposal." His tone was polite, but there was a finality in it that cut deeper than an outright rejection. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the office felt emptier than it had in years. The millionaire sat alone at his desk, the city stretching out below, the paper still lying in front of him like a silent witness. He picked it up, tracing the ink with his finger, the unfamiliar characters mocking him with their elegance. That night, long after the office had gone dark, he found himself replaying her voice in his mind. There had been something unshakable in her tone, a quiet authority, a refusal to be diminished. It was the kind of power he had always believed could only come from wealth or status. But she had carried it effortlessly, armed with nothing more than her knowledge and her dignity. For the first time in a long while he couldn't sleep, and in that restless darkness, a seed of curiosity began to grow, the kind of curiosity that, if fed, could lead a man far from the life he thought he controlled. The next morning arrived with a muted tension that seemed to hang over the office like a fog. The millionaire moved through his routine mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts he couldn't untangle. The events of the previous day played on a continuous loop, her voice, precise and commanding, the subtle defiance that had silenced him in front of his investor. Every detail was etched into his memory, as if the universe had tattooed it there to remind him of his vulnerability. He watched the staff enter one by one, their smiles automatic, their greetings practiced. Yet none of them seemed to notice the turbulence behind his eyes. He realized, almost bitterly, how isolated he had allowed himself to become. People around him were instruments in a symphony of his making, but she was not just another note. She was a melody that refused to be controlled. His curiosity evolved quickly into a sort of obsession. Who was she? Where had she acquired such mastery of language? And, most importantly, why had she chosen to stay in a job that paid so little, in a position so beneath her talents? These questions gnawed at him, prying at the layers of his self-assured existence. He asked around discreetly, making subtle inquiries to colleagues and even other staff members. Some shrugged, claiming ignorance. Others whispered about her enigmatic past, mentioning places she had lived, people she had known, fragments of a life that seemed impossibly rich for someone who performed menial tasks during the day. But details were always scarce, elusive, like smoke slipping through his fingers. By midday, he found himself standing at the door to the janitor's closet, her workspace, staring at the neatly arranged cleaning supplies as if they could reveal her secrets. And then he saw it. A small notebook tucked behind a row of disinfectant bottles. It was leather-bound, worn at the edges, and something about it called to him. He hesitated, knowing he had no right to look, yet an irresistible force compelled him. Opening it, he discovered pages filled with dense, precise handwriting, notes in multiple languages, exercises in translation, personal reflections, even sketches of landscapes and people. Each page revealed intellect, discipline, and a hunger for knowledge far beyond what he had assumed. He felt a pang of admiration mixed with unease. He had underestimated her, and that mistake stung deeply. When she appeared at the doorway, broom in hand, he almost dropped the notebook. She did not startle, did not scold. Her gaze was calm, curious, as if she had known all along that he would stumble upon it. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken recognition. He understood, without a word, that she had chosen when and how to reveal herself. He cleared his throat, attempting to assert the control he was accustomed to wielding. "This is impressive," he said, his voice unsteady. "You could be doing anything with these skills." She smiled faintly, a quiet, knowing curve of the lips. "I am doing exactly what I want," she replied. Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. It wasn't defiance, not really. It was clarity, purpose. From that day forward, a subtle shift occurred. He began to observe her with a different lens, not merely as an employee, but as a force he couldn't ignore. He started leaving small challenges, testing her without overt pressure, and each time, she responded with precision, wit, and an almost effortless grace that both frustrated and fascinated him. As weeks passed, the millionaire realized something he had never anticipated. He was learning from her. Every translation, every insight, every quiet act of competence chipped away at his assumptions. He began to question the very foundations of his life, his power, his wealth, and the way he had defined superiority. It was an uncomfortable awakening. And yet, in that discomfort, he found the thrill of possibility, the realization that true mastery, true intelligence, often existed where it was least expected, and that sometimes, humility was the price one paid for growth. Days blurred together in a rhythm neither entirely chaotic nor entirely calm. The millionaire, once a man who commanded attention with mere presence, found himself unsettled by the quiet competence of the maid. Her movements were deliberate, efficient, yet she carried an air of elegance he couldn't quite place. It was a mastery that required no announcement, no display, and that made it all the more disarming. He tried, in subtle ways, to provoke her. He left documents filled with foreign scripts scattered on the desk, deliberately complex, as if to test her limits. Other employees watched from a distance, curious, sensing the unusual dynamic, whispering behind closed doors. But each time, she responded effortlessly. No hesitation, no falter, only results that left the millionaire scrambling for the next challenge. One afternoon, he found himself standing at the edge of her small workstation again, notebook in hand, heart pounding in a way that surprised him. "You're remarkable," he said, almost breathless. "How did you learn all of this?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed the notebook, a quiet barrier of leather between them. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, held a story he couldn't read, not yet. "Some things," she said slowly, "are learned by choice. Others, by necessity." Her words struck him harder than he expected. There was a life behind her calm demeanor, a past he couldn't begin to imagine. And yet, despite everything she had accomplished on her own, she chose this modest space, this role that society would have deemed beneath her. It was a silent statement, a defiance of expectations, and he felt an unfamiliar pang of respect mingled with frustration. The millionaire realized he was no longer merely observing her. He was studying her. Each glance, each gesture, each subtle inflection of tone became a puzzle he was desperate to solve. The thrill of wealth, the satisfaction of power, all that used to define him, seemed hollow compared to the revelation she embodied. One evening, he orchestrated a more direct test. He invited a small group of clients to the office, presenting documents in a language foreign to them, with the intent of showcasing his own understanding. But as expected, they hesitated, puzzled, fumbling over the complex text. That's when she stepped forward. Without hesitation, without even glancing at him, she began to translate. Her voice was steady, precise, yet infused with a warmth that commanded attention. Clients leaned forward, visibly impressed. The millionaire, standing at the back, felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. The power dynamics he had taken for granted were shifting, not because of his actions, but because of hers. By the time the meeting ended, a quiet transformation had settled over the room. The clients left with smiles, their confidence in the company bolstered by her skill, and the millionaire realized, reluctantly, that she had done more than translate words. She had translated perception, turning doubt into admiration with a grace he couldn't replicate. That night, alone in his office, he pondered the implications. His wealth had built empires, yet it had never commanded the kind of respect she had elicited effortlessly. He understood, in a sudden, unshakable clarity, that intelligence, skill, and dignity could never truly be bought. They had to be recognized, nurtured, and, when necessary, challenged, something she had demonstrated every day without ever raising her voice. For the first time, he felt a mixture of humility and anticipation. Humility, because he had underestimated her. Anticipation, because he was beginning to glimpse the possibilities of learning from someone who refused to conform to his world's rules. And deep down, he knew that whatever came next, his life, and his understanding of power, would never be the same. Days turned into weeks, and the millionaire found himself increasingly consumed by curiosity. It wasn't just her skill with languages or her astonishing composure. It was the life she had led before stepping into his office. A life hidden behind modest attire and quiet gestures. Each day, he observed her more closely, noticing subtle habits. The way she paused to think before speaking, the meticulous way she organized her tools, the fleeting expressions that hinted at memories she carried silently. He began to investigate discreetly, asking around without revealing the reason. Fellow staff members spoke cautiously, as if mentioning too much might violate some invisible code. But fragments emerged, stories of a childhood marked by challenges, moments of brilliance in unexpected places, and a relentless pursuit of knowledge despite obstacles most people would have surrendered to long ago. One evening, after the office had emptied, he lingered by the window, gazing down at the city below. His thoughts kept returning to her. He realized he had never been truly challenged in this way before. Wealth, influence, status, all the tools he had relied upon for dominance, seemed almost irrelevant compared to the quiet mastery she displayed every day. The next morning, he took a bold step. He called her into the office, closing the door behind her. His heart pounded in a way he hadn't felt since his youth, when ambition had been untarnished by doubt. "I need to know more about you," he said, trying to keep his tone casual, though his hands betrayed a nervous energy. She looked at him steadily, unflinching. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because," he began, choosing his words with care, "I've never met anyone like you. I need to understand how someone with your abilities chooses to work here, in this role." Her eyes flickered, a subtle acknowledgement of his question, yet she did not answer immediately. Instead, she leaned slightly against the desk, her posture relaxed, her calm presence filling the room. "Some stories," she said slowly, "are not meant to be shared until they are ready. And some people," her gaze met his, unwavering, "are not meant to hear them." The millionaire felt a pang of frustration mixed with intrigue. Her words were both a barrier and a lure, inviting him to step closer while simultaneously warning him not to. He realized that this was a person who wielded her own power with precision, a stark contrast to the blunt force he was accustomed to using in his own life. Days later, he discovered more clues by accident. A folder, left slightly ajar in a shared storage area, revealed certificates, letters, and awards, evidence of achievements that spanned multiple countries and languages. Her intellect, discipline, and determination were undeniable. And yet, she had chosen to remain in a role that most would consider insignificant. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Every encounter, every observation, every glimpse of her life outside of his perception, chipped away at his assumptions. She had taught him a lesson without speaking it outright, that true skill and dignity were not defined by title, wealth, or status, but by how one carried oneself in the world and the choices one made. The more he learned, the more he recognized that she was not just a maid or a translator. She was a living paradox, unassuming yet commanding, silent yet powerful. And he understood, with a quiet but undeniable clarity, that she had changed the rules of his world without ever raising her voice, without ever demanding recognition. That realization weighed heavily on him. It unsettled him, challenged him, and ultimately inspired him. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of humility, not the kind forced by circumstance, but the kind earned by witnessing someone else's mastery, someone whose value could not be measured in currency or titles. He resolved, silently, that he would continue to watch, to learn, and to understand. And in doing so, he felt the first stirrings of transformation within himself. A transformation that promised to alter not only his perception of her, but of power, respect, and success itself. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation, curiosity, and quiet revelation. The millionaire found himself more and more attuned to her presence. Not in the way he had once been attuned to wealth, influence, or flattery, but in a way that felt unsettlingly intimate. He noticed the rhythm of her steps across the marble floors, the subtle efficiency with which she organized tasks, and the almost imperceptible pauses she allowed herself before making any decision. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, yet natural, an elegance he could not replicate. One afternoon, he found her arranging the office supplies with meticulous care. He watched from a distance, curious, and noticed a pattern emerging. Every item was placed with intention, each one aligned to the edge of the desk, each color carefully considered. At first, he thought it was trivial, a habit of someone methodical. But then he realized it was more than that. It was a reflection of her mind, a silent testament to her discipline, patience, and attention to detail. Unable to resist, he approached her. "You do everything with such precision," he said, forcing casualness into his tone. "Is it always like this?" She looked up at him, eyes steady, unreadable. "It is the way I understand the world," she replied simply. "Order allows clarity, and clarity allows action." He frowned, intrigued. Her answer was deceptively simple, yet it carried weight he couldn't dismiss. He realized she was teaching him something subtle, a lesson not about languages, not about translation, but about perception, focus, and the way one navigates life. As days turned into weeks, he began leaving small challenges for her, not as tests, but as invitations to reveal her skills further. Some were language puzzles, others were logistical problems designed to measure creativity. Each time, she solved them effortlessly, without fanfare, with a quiet confidence that left him both frustrated and fascinated. He found himself learning from her, though he would never have admitted it aloud. One evening, late in the office, he summoned the courage to ask a question that had been gnawing at him. "Why remain here?" he said, gesturing to the office around them. "With your skills, you could work anywhere, lead any team, earn far more than this." Her eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "Not everything is about position or recognition," she said. "Some things are about choice. Some things are about impact." Her words struck him, echoing through the corridors of his mind. He realized that he had spent his life pursuing titles, wealth, and approval, believing those were the measures of power. And yet here was someone who wielded influence quietly, through competence, wisdom, and unwavering self-possession. That night, he walked alone by the window, staring down at the city lights. For the first time, he felt a mixture of humility and longing. Humility because he had underestimated her, and longing because he now understood that true mastery required more than money, more than status, more than influence. It required integrity, discipline, and a quiet confidence he had never possessed. And so, a new tension began to grow in him, a desire to understand, to learn, to see the world not as a place where he ruled, but as a place where true skill and true worth could exist anywhere, often where it was least expected. He knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning, and that his life, and the life of the woman who had silenced him, was about to change in ways neither of them could yet foresee. The following morning brought with it a tension that had become almost tangible in the office. The millionaire found himself restless, replaying her words, her composure, and the quiet authority she wielded with ease. He realized that mere curiosity was no longer enough. He needed context, a deeper understanding of who she was and where her extraordinary skills had come from. Late in the afternoon, he arranged a casual conversation, though the formality of his invitation betrayed his underlying nervousness. "Tell me about yourself," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I mean your life before this office, your studies, your experiences. Anything you're willing to share." She regarded him calmly, as if weighing not only the appropriateness of the question but also the readiness of the answer. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "I come from places most people forget, and I've seen things most people never notice. I've learned to listen before I speak, to watch before I act, and to understand before I judge." Her words were both cryptic and revealing, and he felt a shiver of anticipation. There was a story buried beneath her measured tone, a past rich with challenge and triumph, and it beckoned him. But he also sensed boundaries, lines he must not cross without permission. Over the next few days, fragments of her history began to surface in subtle ways. He discovered references to languages she had mastered as a child, anecdotes about solving complex problems in unlikely circumstances, and hints at a resilience forged through hardship. Each detail painted a portrait of someone far beyond the ordinary, someone whose life had been shaped not by privilege but by determination and intellect. He realized, reluctantly, that his assumptions had been shallow. He had approached her as a subordinate, a minor player in his grand world, when in truth, she was a force, quietly revolutionary, intellectually formidable, and emotionally self-assured. The millionaire began to reflect on his own life. The wealth he had accumulated, the influence he wielded, the respect he commanded, all of it now felt hollow compared to the authenticity and capability he saw in her. She had achieved mastery without needing validation from anyone, without flaunting her accomplishments, and in doing so, she had revealed the fragility of his self-concept. One afternoon, she left a document on his desk, a translation of a complex proposal he had thought only he could handle. There was no signature, no indication of pride. She simply left it there, letting the work speak for itself. He examined it, astonished. Each nuance, each idiom, each subtle cultural reference was perfect, executed with precision that bordered on artistry. The realization struck him hard. He had underestimated the quiet power of knowledge and the unseen impact of discipline. And for the first time, he understood a truth he could not ignore. Influence was not about dominance or wealth. It was about understanding, skill, and presence. That night, as he walked alone past the illuminated skyline, he thought of her again. He knew he had glimpsed only a fraction of her story, yet that fraction had already begun to unravel his assumptions about the world, about himself, and about the meaning of true mastery. He felt a mixture of awe, respect, and an unfamiliar desire. The desire to learn, to grow, and perhaps, to understand the life of a woman who had silenced him without even raising her voice. The following week, the millionaire found himself increasingly drawn into her world, a world that seemed to exist just beyond his reach. Each interaction with her revealed layers of skill, insight, and quiet strength he had never encountered before. But now, curiosity had transformed into a subtle urgency. He needed to understand the origins of this extraordinary talent. One afternoon, as she was arranging files in the office, he hesitated before speaking. "I need to know more about your past," he said cautiously. "Not just the work you do here, but where it all began. How you became this extraordinary." She paused, straightening a stack of papers, her expression unreadable. "Some things are not shared lightly," she replied, her voice calm, measured. "There are memories that carry weight, burdens, and lessons alike. They shape who we are, but they are not always meant for others." He nodded, sensing the gravity of her words. He knew she was testing him, measuring his patience, his intent. And yet, he couldn't stop pressing, not because he wanted to pry, but because he recognized a story worth knowing, a story that could change the way he saw not only her, but the world itself. Over the next few days, he began to notice small traces of her history hidden in plain sight. Letters tucked into her notebook, small notes in the margins of translated documents, references to places and people he could not immediately identify. Each fragment hinted at a life lived with resilience and intellect, a life shaped by challenges most people would never endure. He pieced together the clues slowly, forming a picture of someone who had navigated adversity with unwavering focus. She had not merely learned languages or acquired knowledge. She had mastered herself. Her choices, discipline, and quiet authority were the result of years of self-cultivation, experience, and reflection. One evening, he summoned the courage to approach her directly, hoping for a glimpse behind the veil. "I've seen the traces," he said softly, "the hints of your life before this office. I want to understand. Please, if you can, tell me a part of your story." She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze steady, piercing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Very well," she said, "but only a part. Enough to see that understanding is earned, not demanded." She spoke then, revealing fragments of a childhood marked by hardship and perseverance. A family that had struggled, yet valued learning. Mentors who had guided her in secret. Moments of triumph hidden behind the simplicity of everyday life. Her story was not one of wealth or status, but of intellect, courage, and resilience. As she spoke, he felt the world shift around him. He had been accustomed to commanding respect through titles, money, and influence. But here was someone whose power was innate, cultivated through experience and choice, unbound by societal expectation. Each word she shared illuminated the depth of her character, and he realized that he had underestimated the quiet force she represented. By the time she finished, he was silent, not out of politeness alone, but because he had reached the limits of his own understanding. She had revealed enough to shift his perspective entirely, to teach him that true authority is not given or taken. It is demonstrated through mastery, integrity, and presence. That night, he sat alone, reflecting on everything he had learned. The city outside gleamed like 1,000 distant fires, yet none of it felt important. His wealth, his influence, even his pride, all of it seemed secondary compared to the lesson he had been given by someone he had once dismissed. He understood, for the first time, that power is not measured by what you hold, but by the effect you have on the world around you, often silently, often unseen. The following days carried a new kind of tension into the office, one that neither wealth nor authority could dissipate. The millionaire, once confident in his dominion, now found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, humility, curiosity, and a dawning respect that challenged everything he had believed about power. She continued her work with the same quiet precision, unaware, or perhaps deliberately aware, of the ripple she had created in his world. Every translation, every perfectly executed task, every subtle correction became a lesson, an unspoken challenge. He watched her, not as a boss, but as a student might watch a master, and it was a sensation both exhilarating and disorienting. Unable to contain his curiosity, he began to approach her with questions, not about her work, but about her process. "How do you do it?" he asked one afternoon, gesturing toward the pile of translated documents. "How do you make the impossible seem effortless?" She looked at him, her expression calm, almost amused. "It's not impossible," she said softly. "It's a matter of preparation, observation, and understanding. The work is always within reach. It's the mind that must be aligned." Her answer, simple yet profound, lingered in his mind long after she left the room. He realized that he had spent decades building empires without truly understanding the mechanics of mastery. He had relied on tools, systems, and influence, but she relied on something far deeper: discipline, focus, and intuition honed by experience. Curiosity turned into fascination, and fascination into determination. He began observing her every day, noting the subtle patterns of her behavior, the ways she anticipated problems before they arose, the calm decisiveness with which she executed each task. He recognized that these were not just skills. They were expressions of a life lived with intention and purpose. One evening, alone in his office, he found himself reflecting on the dynamic that had emerged between them. He had entered this world expecting compliance, obedience, and quiet acknowledgement of his authority. Instead, he had encountered mastery, self-possession, and an influence that could not be measured by wealth or title. It was a humbling revelation, one that unsettled him more than any business failure ever had. He realized, with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that she had altered the rules of his world. She had demonstrated that true competence and respect were earned, not demanded, that influence could be exercised quietly yet powerfully, and that one's presence alone could command attention and admiration without a single word of assertion. As the office lights dimmed and the city beyond gleamed like a constellation of ambition, he understood that he had entered a new chapter of his life, one in which he was no longer the master of all he surveyed. Instead, he was a student, observing, learning, and quietly reshaping his understanding of what it meant to be truly skilled, truly respected, and truly powerful. For the first time in years, he felt a thrill not born of dominance, but of discovery. And he knew, deep within, that the lessons he was learning from her would forever alter not only his perception of her, but of himself and the meaning of influence, mastery, and worth in a world that he had always thought he controlled. The following week carried an air of anticipation, unspoken yet tangible, throughout the office. The millionaire found himself increasingly aware of her presence, not merely noticing her work, but sensing the layers of thought and intent behind every gesture. He realized that observing her was no longer enough. He needed context, a glimpse into the life that had forged such quiet power. One late afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the glass walls, he approached her cautiously. "I need to understand more about your past," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Not just the skills you display, but the experiences that shaped you. If you're willing." She paused, straightening the edges of a neatly stacked folder. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a flicker of something deeper. A measure of trust, perhaps, or the weighing of readiness. "Some parts of my life are complicated," she replied. "They carry weight that isn't always easy to share. But I can give you pieces, small pieces." He nodded, grateful for whatever fragments she chose to reveal. Over the next hours, she shared a series of vignettes, glimpses of a childhood marked by struggle, moments of self-directed learning, encounters with mentors who had guided her in secret, and challenges that demanded ingenuity and resilience. Each story was a testament to her determination and intelligence. Yet she told them without pride, almost matter-of-factly, as if they were merely facts of life. The millionaire listened intently, absorbing each word, recognizing for the first time the difference between achievement built on inheritance and mastery forged through experience. Her life had been a crucible, and she had emerged not only unbroken but refined, her skills tempered by circumstance and discipline. As she spoke, he felt a subtle shift within himself. The arrogance he had long carried began to dissolve, replaced by a humility he had never experienced in the presence of another adult. He understood that she had navigated a world far more challenging than his own, yet she moved through it with a grace and authority that money and status could never buy. By the time she paused, he realized that he had not only learned about her past, but about the limits of his own perception. He had underestimated the silent strength that comes from discipline, knowledge, and self-possession. He had assumed that influence could only be wielded through power, yet she demonstrated that the quiet assertion of skill and understanding could command more respect than any title or wealth. He remained silent for a long moment, processing the weight of what he had heard. Then, almost reflexively, he asked, "Why didn't you ever step into a position where your talent could be recognized, celebrated, rewarded?" She looked at him steadily, her gaze unwavering. "Recognition is not the measure of worth," she said softly. "Skill, integrity, and the ability to impact the world, these are what truly matter. I choose when and how to reveal myself." Her words resonated deeply, striking at the very foundation of everything he had once believed about success and influence. For the first time, he understood that mastery was not about visibility, applause, or power. It was about purpose, discipline, and quiet authority. That evening, as he walked alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, the city stretching endlessly below, he felt a profound shift in his understanding. The woman who had silenced him with her translation had taught him a lesson far greater than any he had learned from business or wealth: that true influence is wielded quietly, deliberately, and with integrity, and that respect is earned not by command, but by undeniable skill and presence. He knew, in that moment, that nothing in his life would ever feel the same again. And deep within, he felt the first stirrings of a transformation, one that would challenge his assumptions, reshape his perspective, and redefine what it meant to truly recognize and respect talent. The days following her revelations were charged with an unspoken energy. The millionaire felt a strange mix of admiration, curiosity, and unease every time he saw her move through the office. He realized that he was no longer merely observing her skills. He was witnessing a force that challenged his understanding of influence, authority, and success. She continued to work quietly, methodically, yet there was an almost imperceptible confidence in her movements, the kind that radiates without announcement. Every action, no matter how small, seemed intentional, each choice revealing layers of thought and experience he could only guess at. He found himself analyzing even the simplest gestures, from the way she flipped a page to the way she arranged files on the desk. Unable to suppress his need for comprehension, he decided to confront his own limitations. "You've shared so much about your past," he said one afternoon, "and yet I sense there is more. Something vital, perhaps. I need to understand it, not to control, but to learn." She regarded him steadily, her eyes measuring his sincerity. "Some lessons are revealed only when they are ready," she replied. "Not everyone is prepared to receive them, and not every moment is right. Patience is part of mastery." Her words lingered in the room, resonating beyond their immediate meaning. He realized that she was teaching him once again. This time, not about skill, intelligence, or knowledge, but about timing, perception, and readiness. The subtlety of her guidance was dizzying. It was impossible to resist, yet impossible to grasp fully at once. Later that evening, he found himself pacing his office, replaying her actions and words in his mind. He had accumulated wealth, power, and recognition, yet none of it had ever left him feeling so small, so humbled, and yet so profoundly challenged. He recognized the truth. She had shifted the balance of their dynamic. He had assumed dominance, yet she had quietly redefined it. Over the following days, he observed patterns he had never noticed before. The way she anticipated problems, the way she adjusted her approach with subtle precision, and the quiet, commanding aura that seemed to shape the room without effort. He realized he was no longer the architect of influence in this space. She had quietly assumed a form of authority that was undeniable, unshakable, and deeply transformative. One afternoon, as they worked in silence, he dared to ask, "Do you ever feel burdened by all of this knowledge? By all the skill you possess, and the awareness it brings?" She paused, considering him for a moment. "Burdened?" she repeated. "No, it is responsibility, not burden. Knowledge is a tool. Skill is a choice. Awareness is clarity. All are demanding, yes, but they are not weights to carry. They are means to navigate the world wisely." Her words struck him, echoing through his understanding of life, success, and human potential. He realized that she had not only mastered skills, but also the philosophy of living deliberately, a lesson far beyond any boardroom or balance sheet. That night, alone in his office, he reflected on the growing awareness within him. She had transformed the way he perceived power, authority, and influence. He had once believed that status, wealth, and command dictated respect, but she had shown him a truth far more profound. Mastery, dignity, and impact often emerge in silence, through deliberate choice, and with unwavering integrity. For the first time, he felt the full magnitude of what she had accomplished, and the quiet, undeniable power of someone who had redefined what it meant to be exceptional without ever demanding recognition. The following days unfolded with a strange, almost magnetic tension. The millionaire found himself increasingly drawn into her world, a world that seemed to exist beyond the ordinary constraints of status, wealth, and influence. Every interaction revealed a subtle mastery, not only of skill, but of perception, timing, and presence. One afternoon, he lingered by her workspace, pretending to review documents, while his mind traced patterns in her movements. He noticed the way she anticipated every potential complication, adjusted her approach seamlessly, and executed tasks with quiet precision. There was a rhythm to her actions, a flow that suggested years of disciplined training and experience beyond what he could imagine. Unable to resist, he finally spoke. "You've shared parts of your past," he said carefully, "but I sense there are experiences that have shaped you even more profoundly. I want to understand them, if you're willing to share." She looked at him, her expression unreadable yet penetrating. "Some experiences," she said slowly, "carry consequences that extend far beyond personal understanding. They teach lessons that are revealed only when the moment is right, and to those who are truly ready." Her words resonated like a challenge. He felt the familiar stirrings of curiosity, the urge to probe, but tempered by a newfound respect for boundaries. He realized she was not merely answering questions. She was teaching him, guiding him through the art of patience, the discipline of observation, and the subtlety of understanding human complexity. Later, while organizing a set of translated documents, he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the margin of a notebook. Carefully, he unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note in an unfamiliar language. The elegance of the script, the precision of the phrasing spoke volumes. It was clear she had mastered forms of knowledge and communication that most could only dream of. Yet she wielded them effortlessly, without display or ostentation. That night, he walked the corridors of his office building, replaying the day's discoveries in his mind. The realization was unavoidable. He had underestimated the quiet, disciplined power she possessed. She had navigated adversity, mastered complexity, and cultivated skills that transcended his understanding of status or wealth. And she had done so on her own terms. The days that followed deepened his awareness. He noticed small traces of her past, references to mentors, languages, and experiences that hinted at a life of struggle, ingenuity, and resilience. Each fragment reinforced the lesson he had begun to grasp. Influence is not dictated by title, wealth, or force, but by mastery, discernment, and the choices one makes in navigating the world. He found himself reflecting, more often than he wished to admit, on his own life. Every decision, every act of authority, every exercise of power now seemed measured against the quiet, undeniable competence she displayed. For the first time, he recognized the limitations of his own worldview, the fragility of influence built solely on control and appearance. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in hues of gold and shadow, he understood that this was no longer merely a professional interaction. It was a transformation, a reorientation of his understanding of power, skill, and respect. And at the heart of it all was her. The woman who had silenced him, taught him humility, and revealed that true mastery is often unseen, quiet, and deliberate. The days that followed carried an almost electric tension. The millionaire found himself acutely aware of her presence, not just as a worker in his office, but as a force that subtly reshaped his perception of the world. Every action, every word, every glance carried significance, a silent lesson in discipline, intelligence, and quiet authority. One afternoon, as the office hummed with its usual activity, he noticed a subtle hesitation in her movements. It was almost imperceptible, a pause that spoke of memories she chose not to dwell upon openly. Curiosity gnawed at him, sharper than ever. "Is there something you're holding back?" he asked cautiously. "Something from your past that defines you?" Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "There are parts of life," she said softly, "that cannot be fully understood without experience. Some truths are heavy. They reveal themselves only when the time is right, and to those ready to receive them." Her words, calm yet formidable, struck him deeply. He realized that she was not merely answering him. She was guiding him, teaching him once again that patience, perception, and timing were as critical as skill and knowledge. It was a lesson in restraint, in understanding the weight of information, and in recognizing that mastery often lies in what is not said as much as in what is revealed. Later, while reviewing documents she had translated, he noticed subtle annotations in the margins, references to events, people, and places he could not immediately recognize. Each mark hinted at a life rich with challenge, study, and unseen victories. He understood that these were more than simple notes. They were fragments of a story carefully guarded, a narrative that had shaped her into the formidable presence she now embodied. That night, alone in his office, He replayed the day's observations in his mind. The realization was unavoidable. He had underestimated her, not just her skill, but her experience, her resilience, and the deliberate choices that had forged her character. She had mastered not only languages and logistics but the art of presence, the subtle exercise of influence without command. The more he reflected, the more he saw the contrast between their lives. He had accumulated wealth, influence, and respect, yet he had never faced the same challenges she had overcome. Her achievements were earned, not inherited, and they carried a quiet power that no title or fortune could replicate. By the following morning, he resolved to approach her differently, no longer as a boss testing a subordinate, but as a student of someone who had taught him humility, respect, and the real meaning of mastery. He understood that her silence, her choices, and her deliberate sharing of knowledge were lessons in themselves, lessons that could redefine everything he had believed about power, skill, and influence. As the day unfolded, he observed her with renewed attention, noticing the subtle mastery in every movement, the thoughtfulness in every decision. He realized that he was witnessing something rare, a life lived deliberately, a mind honed through experience, and a presence that commanded respect without demand. And in that awareness, he felt both awe and an unsettling humility, knowing that his own journey toward understanding had only just begun. The office had grown quiet in the late afternoon, the usual hum of activity replaced by a strange stillness. The millionaire, pacing near his desk, felt a tension he could not ignore. He had observed her, learned from her, and been humbled by her presence. Yet he sensed that a deeper layer of her story remained unrevealed. Unable to contain his curiosity, he finally spoke. "You've shared fragments of your past," he said, his voice low. "But I sense there is something more, something pivotal. I don't want to pry, only to understand." She paused, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that seemed to measure his intent. "Some parts of life," she said slowly, "carry lessons so profound that they can only be revealed when the person listening is ready to receive them." The millionaire felt the weight of her words. He realized that this was not a simple conversation. It was a test, a subtle challenge to his patience, humility, and willingness to learn. He nodded, silently committing himself to whatever revelation she deemed fit to share. After a long pause, she began. Her voice was steady, yet there was a depth of emotion beneath her calm exterior. She spoke of a childhood marked by adversity, of mentors who had guided her in secrecy, and of moments where determination and intellect had been her only tools. Each story was a testament to her resilience, her discipline, and her mastery of both mind and circumstance. The millionaire listened, captivated. Every detail reshaped his understanding, not just of her, but of what true skill, influence, and respect meant. He understood, finally, that her power did not come from wealth or status, but from experience, wisdom, and deliberate choice. She had forged herself through challenge and emerged unshakable, her quiet authority undeniable. By the time she finished, he was silent, absorbing the magnitude of what he had learned. He realized that her story was more than personal history. It was a revelation, a lesson in mastery, patience, and integrity that no amount of money could buy. She had not only silenced him once with her skill, but had transformed his understanding of influence and respect forever. The days that followed were different. He interacted with her not as a boss, but as a student, eager to observe, learn, and absorb the lessons she offered. Her presence reshaped the office, not through command or display, but through quiet mastery, precision, and the unspoken authority that only comes from experience and choice. He understood, fully and irrevocably, that she had redefined the rules of his world. Her life, her discipline, her skill, and her deliberate control over what she revealed had taught him lessons no wealth or power could. And for the first time, he felt humility, awe, and a deep appreciation for the quiet, transformative force she embodied. The transformation was complete. The millionaire, once proud and unshakable, now carried a new awareness, a perspective that had been forged in the quiet strength of the woman who had silently redefined his understanding of the world. She continued her work, unchanged in demeanor, yet every action now carried even greater significance. He observed her, not with the arrogance of command, but with respect, curiosity, and the desire to learn. He understood that mastery, influence, and respect are not won through dominance, wealth, or visibility, but through discipline, wisdom, and deliberate choice. One evening, as they both worked late in the office, he finally spoke. "You've taught me more than I ever imagined," he said quietly. "Not just about languages, not just about work, but about life, respect, and the way true skill carries itself." She looked at him, her gaze calm, yet hinting at acknowledgement. "Learning," she said softly, "is continuous, and understanding is earned, not given. The question is whether you are willing to continue observing, listening, and growing." He nodded, silently committing to the lessons she had imparted. In that moment, he realized that his journey had shifted completely. He no longer sought dominance or validation. He sought understanding, mastery, and the subtle power of deliberate choice. She had silenced him once with her skill, challenged him with her intellect, and transformed him with her presence. And in doing so, she had proven a truth he would never forget: that true influence is quiet, deliberate, and undeniable, a force that reshapes not only the world around it but also the hearts and minds of those who witness it. The millionaire left the office that night changed, carrying with him the realization that mastery, respect, and influence are not inherited, bought, or demanded. They are cultivated, chosen, and revealed with patience, integrity, and unwavering strength. And in the quiet, deliberate mastery of the black maid who had once silenced him, he found a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. A lesson about the true power of presence, the subtlety of authority, and the enduring strength of those who shape the world without ever demanding recognition.